The morning rain came without warning. Dark clouds rolled over the quiet neighborhood, and heavy drops splashed against rooftops, lawns, and sidewalks. Emma hurried down her front steps, umbrella in hand, but the wind flipped it inside out the moment she opened it. Frustration tightened her chest. She had an important meeting at work, and the last thing she needed was to arrive drenched. Just as she stepped onto the driveway, a familiar car slowed beside her. It was Daniel, her neighbor's husband. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Daniel and Claire as the couple who always smiled, always helped, always made others feel welcome. Daniel lowered his window, rain misting in. "Emma," he called, his voice calm over the storm. "Do you need a ride? It's not a good day to be walking or waiting for the bus." Emma froze, gripping her broken umbrella. Normally, she would politely refuse. She was the kind of woman who avoided depending on others, who carried her burdens quietly. But the rain was soaking her coat, and the thought of standing outside for another 30 minutes felt unbearable. She glanced at him. His eyes were steady, warm, offering nothing but kindness. "Are you sure?" she asked, raising her voice over the storm. "Of course," Daniel said, smiling. "Hop in." Emma took a quick breath, folded her useless umbrella, and slid into the passenger seat. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud, shutting out the chaos of the rain. Inside, it was warm, and the faint scent of Daniel's cologne hung in the air, subtle, steady. The kind that clung without being overpowering. "Thank you," she said softly. Brushing water from her hair. "No problem," Daniel replied, pulling the car back into motion. This weather came out of nowhere. Claire barely made it to her office before it started. Emma nodded, her fingers tracing the raindrops on the window. They exchanged polite words at first: traffic, work, the unpredictable weather. But soon the silence between them became noticeable, not awkward, but heavy with something unspoken. Emma stole a glance at him. Daniel had always seemed like the kind of man who carried responsibility easily. He looked composed, hands steady on the wheel, expression calm. Yet sitting beside him, she noticed details she hadn't before: the tired shadow under his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when the traffic slowed, the deep sigh he released when he thought no one was listening. "You look like you've had a long week," Emma said before she could stop herself. Daniel gave a quiet laugh, surprised. "You could say that. Deadlines, projects, a few too many late nights." His voice softened. "I guess we all carry things people don't see." Emma nodded slowly. She knew that feeling too well. Working long hours alone at her desk, evenings spent in silence, mornings where she wondered if anyone would notice if she disappeared. She didn't tell him that, but something in the way he said it made her feel less alone. The windshield wipers kept their rhythm, steady and relentless, as if marking the silence that stretched again. Yet this silence felt different, safe, almost comforting. As they turned onto the main road, Daniel glanced at her briefly. "I'm glad I saw you out there. Sometimes it feels good just to have company." His words landed deeper than she expected. Emma felt her chest tighten, not because of what he said, but because of the sincerity behind it. He wasn't just being polite. He meant it. And somehow she understood. They pulled up outside her office building. The rain still poured, the streets glossy under the storm. Daniel stopped the car but didn't rush her out. For a moment they sat in the quiet hum of the engine, neither speaking. Emma reached for the door handle. "Thank you again. You really saved me today." Daniel's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable, yet carrying something that made her breath falter. "Anytime, Emma," he said softly. "Really, anytime." She stepped out into the rain, pulling her coat tighter. As she hurried to the building's entrance, she felt her pulse racing, though she couldn't explain why. It had been just a ride, just a kind gesture from a neighbor. But as she entered the lobby, shaking off the water, she realized her heart, still pounding from the way he had looked at her in that last moment. Emma tried to tell herself it was nothing. Just neighbors. Just a rainy morning. Just a ride. But deep down, she already knew it wasn't that simple anymore. The rain didn't let up as Daniel's car crept along the busy road. The traffic lights glowed against the wet streets, and the sound of water splashing under tires filled the silence. Emma sat with her hands folded in her lap, her coat damp from the storm. She told herself this was just a ride, just neighbors passing time. But the longer she sat beside him, the more she felt the air between them shift. Daniel broke the silence first. "Funny how rain slows everything down," he said, his eyes fixed on the road. "Makes you notice things you don't usually notice." Emma nodded, not sure what to say. She glanced at him, curious. "Like what?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Like how quiet it feels when you're not rushing. Sometimes that quiet makes you think about things you don't normally say out loud." Emma tilted her head, intrigued. She hadn't expected him to speak so openly. Most neighbors exchanged small talk, weather, lawns, weekend plans. But this was different. His words carried weight, as though he wanted to be heard. "What kind of things?" she asked gently. Daniel let out a slow breath. "Things like how people see you one way, but inside you feel different. Everyone looks at me and thinks I have everything together. Good job, good marriage, the perfect life. But sometimes I feel invisible in my own home." His voice dropped lower. "Like no one really sees me." Emma blinked, caught off guard. Daniel wasn't the kind of man she expected to admit weakness. He always looked strong, the kind who carried groceries for others, who smiled at neighborhood barbecues, who waved kindly at everyone. But now, in the dim car light, he looked human in a way that tugged at her chest. "I know what you mean," she said quietly. "I work long hours alone. People think I'm fine because I stay busy, but honestly, sometimes I go days without having a real conversation with anyone. The silence feels heavy." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, and she felt embarrassed for saying too much. But Daniel didn't laugh or brush it off. He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said. "How we can be surrounded by people, yet still feel lonely." Emma looked down at her hands, her heart beating faster. She shouldn't feel this close to him. He wasn't hers to confide in. But there was something undeniable about the way he listened. His attention was steady, focused only on her, as though her words mattered. The windshield wipers clicked back and forth, a steady rhythm in the pause that followed. Then Daniel spoke again, softer this time. "I don't usually say things like this. Not to anyone. But with you, it doesn't feel so strange." Emma felt a rush of warmth and confusion. Why her? She wanted to ask, but the question sat heavy in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "Maybe because we both understand." Their eyes met for a second, and it was enough to make her chest tighten. His gaze wasn't casual. It wasn't the polite glance of a neighbor. It was deeper, searching. As though he saw something inside her she didn't even show herself. The traffic finally cleared, and the car picked up speed. Emma tried to steady her breathing, but the silence now felt alive, charged with meaning. She stared out the window at the blurred city lights, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She barely recognized herself, the woman who had accepted a ride, who was now sitting in this car feeling a pull she couldn't explain. When Daniel pulled up in front of her office building, he didn't unlock the doors right away. His hands stayed on the wheel, his eyes still forward. "I'm glad I drove you today," he said finally, his tone quiet but sure. "Not just because of the rain, because I think we both needed someone to talk to." Emma swallowed hard. The words lodged in her chest, heavy with truth. She wanted to answer, to tell him he was right, that his presence had lifted a weight she hadn't even realized she carried. But fear held her back. She forced a small smile. "Thank you, Daniel. Really?" He turned to her then, his eyes warm but unreadable, like he was holding back something unsaid. "Anytime, Emma, don't forget that." Her heart stumbled at those words. She opened the door quickly, stepping into the storm before she could say anything else she might regret. The rain soaked her shoes as she hurried inside. But she barely felt it. Her mind was too busy replaying the ride, the honesty in his voice, the way he had looked at her, the way her chest still ached with a mix of relief and confusion. It had been just one car ride, just a conversation on a rainy morning. Yet Emma knew deep inside that something had shifted. She had seen a side of Daniel no one else talked about, and he had seen the quiet loneliness she kept hidden. The days after the rainy morning stretched out quietly, but Emma couldn't shake the memory of the ride. Daniel's words replayed in her mind, soft, honest, and too close to her own secret thoughts. She tried to bury them under her routine, working late into the night, filling her silence with music, yet his voice returned in moments she least expected. Even the sight of his car parked in the driveway stirred something inside her, something she didn't want to name. One evening, a week later, Emma's car betrayed her. She turned the key again and again, but the engine refused to start. Frustrated, she stepped out, hands on her hips, staring at the hood as though it might answer her. The sun was slipping behind the houses, painting the street in golden shadow. She felt a mix of helplessness and irritation. Then she heard footsteps. When she turned, Daniel was crossing his lawn toward her, sleeves rolled up, casual in a plain t-shirt. He looked concerned but calm, like he always did. "Trouble with the car?" he asked. Emma sighed. "It won't start. I've tried everything I know, which isn't much." "Let me take a look," he offered without hesitation. She stepped aside as he leaned under the hood. Checking wires and parts she didn't understand. His hands moved with quiet confidence, his brow furrowed in focus. Emma found herself watching him, not just the way he worked, but the quiet energy around him. He didn't seem rushed. He didn't complain. He was simply present, and for reasons she couldn't explain. That steadiness made her chest ache. After a few minutes, he adjusted something and tried the ignition again. The engine coughed to life. Emma let out a small laugh of relief. "You saved me again," she said. Daniel closed the hood and leaned against it casually, wiping his hands on a rag. "It was a small fix," he said, brushing off the praise. Then he looked at her more closely, his eyes soft. "You always look so strong, Emma. But right now, you look tired." The comment caught her off guard. She swallowed. "It's been a long week." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air felt thick, heavy with words left unsaid. Daniel's gaze lingered, steady and searching, as though he wanted to speak but was holding himself back. Emma felt her heart pick up, her pulse in her ears. Then, softly, he asked, "Do you ever feel like life places certain people in your path for a reason? Like maybe you're meant to notice them?" Emma's breath caught. She knew he wasn't asking about fate in general. He was asking about them. The words pressed against her lips, the truth she had been avoiding. But before she could answer, a familiar voice broke the spell. "Daniel." Claire's cheerful call carried across the street. She was standing by their porch, waving. Her smile warm as always. Daniel straightened instantly, the softness in his face replaced by his usual calm. He gave Emma a small nod, as though sealing their unspoken moment back into silence. "Good night, Emma," he said quickly, his tone polite again, almost distant. Emma forced a smile. "Good night, Daniel." She watched him walk back toward Claire, her heart sinking with every step he took away from her. She hated the way guilt pricked at her, hated the way she couldn't stop feeling the ache of something unfinished. That night, Emma sat by her window, the glow of her lamp spilling across the room. She could see the faint outline of Daniel and Claire's house across the yard. Claire's laughter drifted faintly in the air, and Emma closed her eyes, pressing her palms against her chest. What was happening to her? He was her neighbor's husband. He wasn't hers to think about. Yet the truth sat stubbornly in her heart. His presence had stirred something she hadn't felt in years. A spark, dangerous but real. The days that followed only made it harder. She noticed him in ways she never had before, the way he waved when mowing the lawn, the way his voice carried across the street when he called for Claire, the easy laughter he shared with neighbors. To everyone else, he was simply Daniel, steady, reliable, kind. But to Emma, he was becoming the quiet reminder of something she longed for: connection. Understanding, being seen. Every small encounter carried weight. A smile across the fence lasted too long. A passing hello felt loaded. Each time their eyes met, Emma felt the same breathless pause. as though the world tilted slightly off balance. One Saturday morning, she stepped outside to collect her mail. Daniel was in his driveway, unloading bags from his car. When their eyes met, his smile was polite, but his glance lingered a moment too long. Emma's pulse quickened. She looked away quickly, clutching the envelopes in her hand. But the heat in her chest stayed. That night, lying awake in bed, she admitted the truth to herself. Something had shifted between them, something unspoken but undeniable. And the hardest part wasn't the spark itself. It was the knowledge that neither of them had the right to chase it. Still, the memory of his voice haunted her. Do you ever feel like life places certain people in your path for a reason? Emma closed her eyes, the ache pressing deeper. She had no answer, but she knew she would never forget the question. A week passed, and Emma told herself she was moving on. She buried her thoughts in work, tried to avoid looking toward Daniel's house, and reminded herself that nothing good could come from what she was feeling. But some things are harder to ignore than silence. It was a Saturday afternoon when Emma walked into the local grocery store. The aisles were busy with weekend shoppers, the hum of carts rolling over the floor, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery. She pushed her cart slowly, going through her list, when she turned a corner and froze. Daniel was standing by the shelf of teas, holding a box in his hand. He looked casual, relaxed, but when his eyes lifted and landed on hers, everything around her seemed to fade. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Daniel gave a polite smile, the kind that neighbors gave each other, but his eyes said more. Emma's breath caught as she forced her feet to move forward. "Hi, Daniel," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "Emma," he replied, warm but quiet. "Running errands too?" She nodded, holding up her cart. "Just the usual things. You." "Claire's busy today," he said simply, "so I thought I'd take care of a few things." They talked casually about groceries, about the weather, about nothing that really mattered. Yet every word felt heavy, as though they were both aware of what lay beneath the surface. Their smiles lingered a little too long. Their eyes met a little too often. Then it happened, something so small, yet so powerful. They both reached for the same box of chamomile tea. Their hands brushed. Just a fleeting touch, skin against skin, but it sent a jolt straight through Emma's chest. She drew in a sharp breath, her fingers trembling as she pulled her hand back. "Sorry," she whispered, her cheeks warm. But Daniel didn't look away. His eyes held hers, steady, calm, but with a spark she couldn't ignore. And then, in a voice so low it felt like it was meant only for her, he said, "Don't be." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Emma felt her pulse race, her chest tighten, her breath slip away for a second. The store around them blurred, voices and sounds melting into nothing. It was just the two of them standing too close, caught in something neither of them could name. She turned her face quickly, reaching for another item just to steady herself. She needed space, distance, anything to calm the storm inside. Daniel stepped back slightly, giving her room, though his presence still lingered like a shadow. They finished their small talk work errands. Harmless details, but every word carried an undertone. Every smile hid something they both felt but couldn't say. When they parted ways at the checkout, Daniel gave her a nod, his expression unreadable, yet filled with quiet meaning. "Take care, Emma," he said softly. "You too," she replied, her voice barely audible. Emma carried her bags out into the cool air, her heart still pounding. She walked to her car, set the groceries in the trunk, and leaned against it for a moment, trying to steady herself. Her breath came quick, uneven, as though she had just run a race. But she hadn't run. She had simply touched his hand. Driving home, she replayed the moment over and over, the brush of his skin, the warmth in his eyes, the quiet weight of his words. Nothing had happened. Not really. No promises, no confessions, no decisions. Yet everything had changed. Back in her kitchen, she unpacked her groceries slowly, her mind far away. She picked up the very box of tea they had both reached for and held it in her hands. Her chest tightened as she realized she would never look at something so simple the same way again. That night, as she sat by her window with a cup of tea, she stared at the soft glow of Daniel and Claire's house across the yard. Lights flickered inside, shadows moved, laughter carried faintly through the air. To the world, they were just neighbors. But Emma knew that a line had been drawn in silence, one neither of them had crossed, yet one they both felt deeply. Her breath caught again, not from guilt, not from fear, but from the truth of what she had discovered. Sometimes it wasn't the dramatic moments that left you breathless. It wasn't grand gestures or stolen kisses. Sometimes it was a quiet car ride, a confession spoken softly, or the brush of a hand in a grocery store aisle. Emma closed her eyes, pressing her palm against her chest. She didn't know what the future would bring, or if the feelings between her and Daniel would ever be spoken aloud. But she knew one thing for certain: her heart had been stirred awake. And for the first time in a long time, she felt alive. The story didn't end with answers. It didn't end with declarations. It ended with a R,